guys, welcome back to the Ghost Doctor channel. I'm Chris Boris, and today we're going to be talking about a very heavy subject matter: demons. Now, as you know, I've classified the spirit world into 6 different classifications of spirits, and for the last couple months I've been doing the exact same thing with the demon side of things. And the reason I'm doing this video is because evil is ramping up in this world. There's not a day that goes by where I tune into the news and I'm seeing something that's being twisted or perverted for the guise of evil. So we need to know what we're up against. And this list that I'm about to present to you today has taken me a very, very long time to put together. And the problem is, when we look at lists like this online, we don't see something very fleshed out. Things that talk about, okay, well, there's Lucifer and Moloch and Baal, and they'll talk about the archetypes, but they won't talk about the different denominations of demons and the hordes that exist in the afterlife. So this video is going to cover a lot of ground, and this has been, I've done so much research on this, and I've talked to a lot of different spirits to nail down all these facts. And a lot of this is going to sound odd, but trust me when I say every single one of these tier systems of demons do exist. Now, I've come up with 10 different demon types that exist in the afterlife, and what I've found is that each one of them have different power levels, skill sets, and ways to go about destroying God's creatures, which is the human race, everything in the human realm, and even spirits as well. They have to watch out too, which we'll talk about. But the first classification that I want to hit up is the soldier class. Okay, this is the basic demon type that is out there, because when you think of demons, this is basically what falls in that category. The all things that are dark, all things that are horned, they just ooze negativity, and they just seep into all the corners of the universe. And if you feel something negative, it's basically they're behind it. And they're basically the foot soldiers and the military fulfilling the wishes of their masters, so to speak. But we have demons. We have, there's a bunch of different type of creatures. If you research Buddhism, you'll see that there are probably about 10 different hells in all. There's cold hells, hot hells, crushing hells, just a bunch of them. And this is where a lot of these creatures come from. The darkness is what is referred to as the abyss, and they're just crawling out of it and doing whatnot. But you have demons, you have things like reptilians, which people have seen. They look like reptiles, but they have been seen in locations where paranormal activity has been reported. And they're very terrifying. They feed off fear. They love it. And anything a lot of these types of spirits, or demons, I should say, they'll come in and feed. A lot of them will just feed off people. And when I say feed off people, I mean feeding off their life force. Now, there's one other spirit type in here, or demon type I should talk about, is the Furies. Now, this is a lot of times overlooked, but these Furies are interesting because if they come from Greek myth. They don't attack the living, they actually attack the dead. Now, these are the demon types that go after the humans, like once they crossed over, if you've committed murder, just a lot of torment and things like that, they will come after you and feed on you and make your afterlife a living hell. And they're called the Furies. So it's interesting. This was actually alluded to in the movie Ghost, the movie from the 1980s, where the guy crosses over. In this instance, where these Furies kind of showed up, they kind of came out of the darkness at one point and sucked this guy into the darkness. They dragged him into it because he had killed somebody. This is exactly the same thing. Furies, interesting. Now the second class that we have is the commanding class. Now, this is one step higher. They're a lot more dangerous than the demons, usually in possession cases. When things start happening, usually have the demons kind of come in, scout around, and then when things get intense, they kind of step inside and let their supervisors take over. And these are called devils. Now, let me be clear. Demons and devils are different. Devils are a lot stronger, a lot powerful, and they're a couple notches above in the totem pole when we're talking about ranking in the the hell realm. So we have devils, we have things like the jinn, which are based off genie myth in Islamic culture. And these things, they can manipulate reality, they can grant wishes that go awry. Just all kinds of bad things happen around these things. Then you have the third class, which is the ruling class. Now this is all the top dogs that you've ever heard about. Diablo, Lucifer, Satan, Baal, Moloch, and they're the ones in charge saying, okay, you do this, you do that, whatever. And it's interesting because I've read in some instances where, like, the darker religions, they will call upon Lucifer to command demons, this way or that, either for good or for bad, which I find interesting. But, again, you're calling upon Lucifer, that dark entity, which becomes a double-edged sword. So you got to be careful with this stuff. Now I'm going to talk about the fourth class, which is a class that's I've never heard anybody talk about, but this is the Parasitical Class. Now when we look at this class, we see the ones, these are the kind of like the bottom feeders of the afterlife, of the demonic, kind of feeding off things. You'll find these things in bars, in places where there's a lot of fighting going on, just a lot of the dark corners of the city. And this is where you find things like succubuses, incubuses, just a lot of the critters like the bats and the rats. And one of the things I've been trying to get a lot of information about lately are spiders. These things, which I thought were good at first, when I first started researching these things, because I saw a couple people go, oh yeah, astral spiders are really nice. But in my lifetime, I've had some really bizarre, dark run-ins with these spider things, and they're nothing to trifle with, believe me. And in my line of work, I've run across these things more times than I want to admit. But these spider things are very dangerous, and I'll get into those in a future video. But anybody that tells you that these spiders, whatever they are good and they're healing and, oh yeah, they're great, they're being lied to, they're being duped. These things are bad news, and they can grow, and when they get really big, they can control a lot of people at one time, and you don't mess with them. Think Stranger Things, like the big nasty thing that's kind of like spider-like in the background. Props to the Duffer brothers for bringing that information to light. And I've been told that they're getting messages from the spirit world to take this message and bring it to the forefront with the masses in this kind of a setting. So, but yeah, these spiders are bad news. All right, so let's talk about the fifth classification, which is the possession class. These are demons or humans that are in the destructive mindset that possess people to partake in earthly pleasures again. So this is where you have spirits that were once human. You have the more powerful, like the devils and the demons and things like that. You have, in Jewish culture, you have things called Dybbuk. That's where that name comes from, the Dybbuk box. But in their culture, they believe that they have Dybbuk and Nudniks, and both of those are spirits that have lived, passed on, and they want to partake in the human realm again, whether through possession or not. And this is where we get a lot of demons that I like to call the seven deadly sin obsessed, because this is where we get these mindsets of demons that feed off lust, ego, pride, jealousy, rage, all the seven deadly sins that you find. Kind of like in Shazam, you see those evil entities, there's 7 of them, of course, and they come to life. But of course, this is the demonic realm that we're talking about, and each one of them, they will feed off people that are obsessed with, porn or, whatever. They'll kind of latch on at that moment and be like, I got to feed off this person at that time. The next classification, no brainer. This is the shadow class. This is where we get things like shadow men. We get things like psychic, spiritual pollution. And when I talk about that, it's all the negativity that people build up over time. Once they pass on, that negativity has nowhere to go. It just kind of lingers. And in some cases, these things can kind of evolve into what I like to call Frankenstein tulpas. Now, if you don't know what a tulpa is, it's kind of like an energy that somebody is putting out there, and it kind of takes on a life of its own. Well, this is the same thing, but in a negative instance. So when I talk about this Frankenstein tulpa, what happens is this person leads a negative life. They die. Their essence moves on to where they need to go, but the negative part of their essence is left behind. You get enough of those negative essences left behind, and they start to band together in a cohesive, like nature, and take on a life of its own. Now, a lot of times, we're talking about formless creatures here. So a lot of times when you see these shadow men and shadow creatures, they take on a 2D form. And what they're doing is they're breaking into our world, but they can't fully break into our world because they're not a complete thing. And the reason why they take on a human form is because they want to be human. They want to emulate us as much as possible. So sometimes they'll appear to us as a human. They'll wear hats because that is exactly what humans do. And what better way to emulate them than through that image. Okay, so the seventh classification that I have is the Watcher class, or the Observer class. And when I talk about this classification, we have demons that kind of sit back and they're watching, seeing what happens. But a lot of times, what we find in this category are things like aliens, gray aliens, and things like that. And one great representation of this is on Ghost Adventures. Last year, Zach caught this amazing footage of this alien-like thing at a haunted location. Looked like a gray alien. There's been other instances with this thing called the Skull Sessions that happened in England when they were talking to this entity. They're like, "Can you show yourselves to us?" When it did, it looked like one of those gray type aliens. So yeah, and people were like, "Oh, they're aliens. They're from outer space." They're duping you, just like with the spider thing. Do not fall into that trap. Now, these things, they're watchers, they're observing, they're just sitting back and waiting for the right time to pounce, because when they do, that's where we get the abduction cases, and they're very jealous of our culture. They're extracting things against our will. Very nasty things, very nasty creatures. And of course, to combat them, you do need a strong religious background, and that will disrupt, whatever they're doing. And that, of course, brings us to the eighth classification, which I like to call the corrupting class. Now, this is what I like to call the fallen angels. What happens is they're in heaven, or they ascended into the heaven realms, and for whatever reason, they start to turn away, and their mindset starts getting very twisted and angry, and what they do is they fall from grace. They fall from heaven. So that's why they're called fallen angels, and they come down into the hell realms, and these type of creatures basically are the ones that are whispering in people's ears saying, yeah, do this, kill these people, and do that. When people like mass murderers are being interviewed and things like that, they'll say, I heard voices. And these are the fallen angel class that are whispering and pulling the strings behind the curtain, so to speak. That's not to say that these murderers are totally exonerated because of this, because no, they have to. Their mindset has to be at a certain vibration to allow these things to seep in. So they're just as guilty as the acts that they are committing. Now let's move on to the ninth classification, which are the redemption demons. Now, just like with the fallen angels where they fall from grace, we have a demon class that is trying to work back into the grace of God. So they're, going up instead of down. Now, I haven't interacted with any of these types of demons, so I can't tell you, what they're all about, but they do exist. We have redemption demons, and they're probably trying to do good and trying to reverse their karma in any way possible. Now, the last demon class that I have here is probably the most overlooked class of all time, and I've never heard anyone talk about this, but this is the Dreamtime class. Now, I know you're probably going to think I'm totally crazy at this point. But one thing I've done a lot in my life is a lot of dream work. And when I say that, it's a lot of lucid dreaming and where do I take my dreams once I start lucid dreaming. Now, once that happens, I've run into these weird entity types that turn out to be very demon-like, demonic, very terrifying. Now, these things, they feed off people. They're, like I said, we're coming back to the parasite nature of demons, but they're feeding off people, but they're only limited to the dream world. A lot of times when you encounter these things in dreamland, they will mimic loved ones. So basically how this encounter goes is I'll basically see a loved one that have died and I'll be like, hey, I can't believe you're here, but something will be off about them. And I'll test and I'll be like, yeah, remember that one time? And they'll be like, yeah. And there was never that one time. Who are you? And what'll happen is they'll turn into this demonic-like thing and start to lash out at you. And mostly at that time, I'll pop out of my dream state. Other times, they'll appear as humans, kind of like the Shadow Class, where they're appearing as humans. And most of the time, their costume fails when you look into their eyes because they're vacant, they're empty. And it's kind of like this doughy substance that starts to melt away from their eyes, revealing the blackness underneath. That's the best way I could describe it. I call these the black-eyed people. I know there's a phenomenon of the black-eyed children. I think that might be one and the same phenomena. I'm not sure at this point, but the black-eyed people do exist in the dream state. I've encountered them. One of the ways to hurt them is actually to latch onto them and wake up while you're still holding them. You could really hurt them when you do that because there are different layers. Like I talked about in a previous video, there are different layers to our reality. And science actually backs this up, that the brain goes through different cycles when you're awake down to the dream state. You have the alpha stage, the beta stage, delta stage. And what you're doing is when you grab onto these things and you wake up, you're dragging them through all the different layers of reality, and it hurts them, and it can actually kill them if you bring them out into, the reality that exists right here and now. And I know I'm going to sound crazy, but there are times where I've woken up from a dream and I'll see things like kind of hovering above me. When you see stuff like that, it makes you a believer real quick. So that's why I usually have to bless my house and clear it out every couple of months because, things kind of seep back in over time, especially doing this type of work that I'm doing, which, is totally God-driven at this point because I want to help people. I want to make sure that they know this knowledge. Nobody else is talking about this. I know I'm going to sound completely off the rails, deranged in some circles, but I don't care. I want to get this information out to you guys. Unless you start lucid dreaming for yourself, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. So there it is, the 10 classifications of the demon list. Is it a complete list? No, not really. This is something that I'm still working on. I could spend years working on this thing and kind of move things around. For right now, this is what I have, and I wanted to share it with people because we're at a time right now where I see the demonic really slipping in at a time when people are just, they don't want to believe in God or the devil or there's a spiritual battle really raging on. And that's what that's the ultimate goal with this Ghost Doctor channel, is to show that yes, there is a light and a dark and something more powerful at play than we are privy to. It's like when I went to the St. Augustine Lighthouse and I asked Eliza, are there rules to the afterlife? And she said yes. That right there is confirmation that there's something bigger than this. If there are rules in place, there's somebody policing the afterlife, and if there's something policing the afterlife, then there's a spiritual tier system that exists. And when you start getting to that, you're going to see, okay, well, so wait a minute, that's got to mean there's angels, demons, and yeah. So I hope you appreciate it. I hope you gained a lot of insight from this video, and please share it, like it, and thank you. God bless.